So today we're talking about simplicity. And it's interesting, I actually got this idea because I was reading a book about mysticism. And it was actually specifically Tibetan Buddhist Tantric mysticism, which seems like a funny collection to put all together. And the very first thing they talked about was simplicity, and how simplicity was actually central to a spiritual path, which is really interesting because so often, we embark on a spiritual journey and we believe that the point is to learn a million things. We have to learn the names of all the gods and goddesses, or the meditation techniques, or this, Sanskrit word or whatever. And we need to learn all these things. And sometimes that's really fun. I mean, as a perpetual student, I dig learning new things. But sometimes it really actually takes us away from our journey. We get so focused on trying to wrap our heads around concepts or trying to memorize this that we stop actually living a spiritual life. And simplicity is kind of the answer. It's kind of like the value of silence, right? Like we think that, if we're supposed to be talking and we're supposed to be eloquent and we're supposed to hear the magic words, the magic words, if I could just hear those magic words, that would just sort my whole life out. And then I'd have the answers that I'm looking for. When so often, if we can actually come to that place of silence, that's where the answer comes. Right? It's actually the simplicity of the silence that it's almost like it opens a space and the answer can rise. And the answers are so simple. Like the answer might just be say no, or say yes, or give it a go. Like the answers are so simple. And so often when we're confused in life, when we have anxiety, when we're depressed, like so many of the things that we suffer from mentally and emotionally are actually due to extreme overcomplication of things. Not always, but very often it's almost like even if something kind of begins with a trauma, or it begins with pain in life or a difficult situation, there is a magic in simplicity that will actually help us find our way out. Right? The world sort of creates this complex system. And then all of a sudden it's like we get caught in that system of thought, and it's like we can't get out. And then our brain starts to replay the traumas and replay the conversations and replay this. And then we replay conversations that haven't even happened. And we spend all this time in our head having conversations with people who aren't there. Like this is an overcomplication of things. Right? When we actually come down to the simple truth of every situation, it almost annoys us. And I say this because it's like we've been trained for drama, right? We've been trained for complexity. Like if I was to say to you, how are you doing? And don't get me wrong, there are days that if someone says, how am I doing? I need to say, okay, let's pick a topic because there's so many aspects of things going on. And over here, I'm kind of like thinking about a million things. And over here, I'm really simple. And over here, I'm kind of depressed. And you know what I mean? Like we're complex beings. But there's something about not overcomplicating things, because we've been trained, like even watching soap operas, right? When I was young, my mom watched Young and the Restless. I watched General Hospital. We watch all these soap operas. It's like pure drama. And they're not just pure drama. It's almost like we were subconsciously being trained to take one tiny little thing and drag it out over an entire season. How can I take this one thing, really make a good story out of it, and really get the emotional juice, right? Like it's weird. Like Hollywood, everything. It's like, why are we so addicted to that drama? Why do we like that? Why do we want to make things so complicated all the time? And And sometimes things are complicated. Like Einstein used to say, simplify as much as possible, but not too much. Right? Like, I mean, don't get me wrong, some things are complicated, but sometimes they're not. And, apparently it's an Einstein day. Einstein also used to say that if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you probably don't understand it. And I really appreciate that. That's something that has rung in my mind for my whole life. That if it's not simple, then I'm actually making it complex, and it doesn't need to be. This is why I'm addicted to Richard Feynman. Richard Feynman was this brilliant physicist, like just brilliant. And if you ever go on YouTube and just look up, I should have thought of this earlier. But there's a series that somebody did, and they just sat him down in a chair and they just asked him questions. Like they said, can you explain magnetism? Can you explain elasticity? Can you explain this? Richard Feynman looked at the world literally like through the eyes of a child, and there was something in his simplicity that was his brilliance. He didn't overcomplicate things, which is how he saw the things that other people didn't see. I'm reading his book right now. Anyway, one of his autobiographies. And he was asked to investigate the shuttle crash back in the 80s. And so he was on this commissioner's commission. He was on the commission to investigate why the shuttle crashed. And of course, the complexity of working with the government and all this. So it's hilarious reading his perception of having to work on this commission inside of NASA and the government and the press and all this complexity. And very often, even when he did work for the government and stuff, he would actually not take the hotel rooms that they gave him, and he would go downtown and stay at some really, really cheap motel just to be away from the fray, be away from all the politicking and the posh people in the fancy restaurant. He just wanted to go and sit in a dive and just have a cup of coffee and be able to think straight, right? He was kind of the master of simplicity to me. And it allowed this brilliance to come. So if you ever find this video on YouTube about him, I'm trying to think what it's called. But anyway, he'll just sit and he just starts talking about atoms. He goes, well, you just have to imagine there's all these jiggly bits. And when they move closer together, they jiggle faster. And then when they do this, and you're listening and you're 100% with him, right? Because he hasn't overcomplicated it with jargon and, you must have to know this theorem and this theorem, because this is all just what we do to make ourselves feel smart, right? He didn't have to do that. He really was smart. He was actually a genius, but it was in the simplicity. So now you imagine if you walk through life with that sort of childlike perspective, how much simpler life is when we're not constantly trying to imagine what's that other person thinking? How is this going to affect this? How is this going to, oh my gosh, what if I do this? And, I can see the 400 possible things that could go wrong or could go right, or I hope, it's so complex and all of it's nonsense. It's all fantasy. And there's something about just saying, well, what feels right now? I'll try that. And then even we think, you've got to be more serious about it. It's like, why? Why do we have to be more serious about it? Why do we take life so seriously? Whether we choose this or we choose that, what difference does it make? Even something crazy like a job. You can say, I don't know if I should take this job or this job. And then you lose sleep over it. And it's like, so what? It's literally a job. We are these incarnate, infinite beings that have come to earth to have an experience. Whether we work for Joe for a little while, or we go over here, we work for this company, or then we leave, who cares? It's just an experience. It's almost like we've also been taught that this is really important. Maybe it's in our education system, when we're 15 and the teachers are like, you've got to pick your right choices, and you don't want to close doors on the opportunities, and you don't want to, and it's so important, right? It's like, Really? Why is it so important? You ask anyone who has a cancer diagnosis or anyone who's gone through anything really painful or difficult in life, you soon find out how absolutely unimportant where you work is, how much money you make, all those things. It's like, we'll change it then. Like, whatever. Maybe you married this person and maybe it was a really juicy, difficult experience and you left that person. And maybe you were single for a while or maybe you found someone else. It's so strange. It's like the importance that we put on every decision and everything. It's like, it's not about us. Like, it's just a choice. It's just life. Like, it's not that big a deal. So there's a lot of interesting things that we've been trained to believe, right? That no, this is really important. Really important. It's kind of like, ever since I was little, like when I was a teenager, Twiggy was all the rage, right? And so you had to be size 0. And we got this in our heads that we had to be skinny, right? And of course I wasn't size 0. My bones aren't size 0, right? That's just not who I was. And so you get it in your head that you have to lose weight, you have to lose weight, you have to lose weight. And you'll do anything to do it. So when I was in high school, I became bulimic. Like I threw up every day, 3 times a day, because I would eat and then throw up and eat and then throw up. And I did that and I got super skinny and nothing changed in my life. And this is one of those weird lies that we're told. If you get this job, then you're going to be happy. If you get into that relationship, then you're going to be happy. If you do this thing, then you're going to be happy. So then we fill our minds with all these things because we must create the situation so that this happens. I have to have the right training and I have to look right and I have to, be lovable. I have to be all these. It's so complicated, right? This is exhausting and it's all nonsense. It's not that interesting and it won't make us happy. If we're not happy right now, we're not going to be happy then either. And so it's a really interesting thing to really retrain our minds to even value simplicity, to really sit with whatever it is we might be going through right now, to really ask ourselves, is it really this complicated? Is the problem I'm struggling with actually this complicated? Like, let's say, for example, like I know some of you guys have a pile of kids at home right now. And I remember when I had a pile of kids at home, life seemed really complicated. The million moving parts, and it wasn't just the kids, it's the partner, it's the in-laws, it's the all the things. And then there's the teething, and then there's the school, and then there's the this, and then there's the that. Right? It's super complicated. But if I had to look back, and that whole if I knew then what I know now, what made it complicated was the idea inside of me that it all had to look a certain way, that I had to be on top of it. And not only did I have to be on top of it, I also had to be accomplishing something myself. I also had to be, I had to be Katrina so-and-so or something and have all the kids and do this and do this and da-da-da. And the bottom line is I was exhausted, absolutely exhausted to the core of my being. And when you are tired, everything's complicated. Like everything. Like you just have no will to do anything when you get overtired. And so the most simple solution for me when I was home with my kids was to sleep. Just if I had valued my sleep more, if I had valued afternoon naps instead of cleaning the house when the kids were napping, to sleep, to ask my friends to come and help, if I had valued the importance of a well-rested mom, my life wouldn't have been so complicated, And I always laugh too because, I've been self-employed for 25 years. So it's always funny when my business becomes complicated. Because I'm the boss. Like, I created it. I created every single aspect of my life. And then I get all stressed out because I'm too busy or something. And it's like, I think it's hilarious, right? To actually go, okay, Katrina, you know, what, and for me, I always look at the philosophy. What's the philosophy that's running in my head that's directing these thoughts, that's directing my actions, that's directing these things that I think I'm supposed to be doing, and I can't give that, oh, and I've got to do this, and I got it, oh, and I couldn't do this, you know? Why? Why? Like, I remember when, and I talk about this in my book, What If You Could Skip the Cancer? So most of you guys know this, but back in 1999, I was sick. I had breast lumps. My kids were 2 and 4 years old. I was married, dairy farm, super busy, complicated life, right? And I got sick, and my mom had died 4 years before that of breast cancer. And so this was a really big deal. And I didn't want to go medicine just because everyone had died. Like, everyone in my family had died of this. So I wanted to find a different way. And I remember, so Jim, this teacher, appeared in my life very serendipitously. And I remember lying on his table and I'm crying. And he said, what do you want right now? Like, what do you really want? And I looked at him, and kind of in maybe one of my very first moments of actual truth, and we're going to talk about this, because my mind was so, I don't want to say it was complex. All of our minds are complex, but my mind was so filled with complexities. It was so important that I had to be here for this, and I had to do this, and I had to take care of this, and I had to do this, and this, it's like I just had this feeling that if without me, everything was just going to topple over, right? And so the idea of even accessing my own truth within all of that was impossible, right? Like, it was so buried within this morass of complexity, right? But in this moment, I looked at Jim and I started crying, and I said, I just want to go away. And he said, well, you should go away. He says, you can come and stay at the chalet for as long as you want. It's all yours. And I start crying, and I'm like, I can't. What about Wayne, my husband? What about my kids? What about the farm? What about da 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 da? And Jim looks at me with this kind of that twinkle in his eye that gurus have, because they kind of know better. And he looks at me and he says, well, you could die. Then they'd figure it out. And I laid there and I realized that if I died, they'd figure it out. They'd figure it all out. Everybody would figure it out. And as morose as that may sound, it was a complete turning point for me. It was like, wow, how did I put myself at the center of so many people's existence or something, And then at least I could start at zero and start to even remember who I really was. Like, what would actually bring me joy? Not just responsibility and obligations and all these things, but what actually would bring me joy? Why was my soul even brought here? Like, what am I doing here? And so it was a really interesting thing, So sometimes we do have big calamities, and not that I would ever wish that on anyone, but we almost need something big to kind of clear out the cobwebs, bring us to center and say, okay, hold on, life's actually much simpler than I'm making it. So one big way that we can simplify our thoughts is to really listen to our emotions. I was sitting having dinner with someone the other day, and we were just chit-chatting. We were really having a great conversation. Like, it was really awesome. And then all of a sudden they said something, and it threw me. Like, it just kind of pissed me off. Like, it just sort of, and I just sort of felt myself energetically go like this. Like, I was just like, But it wasn't a big deal. Like what they said, it'd be arguable whether or not it was actually a big deal or whether it was mean or whether it was, I don't know what it was. But wow, did it ever push me back? Like I suddenly didn't really want to talk to them anymore. I wasn't feeling so warm and fuzzy and open and trusting. Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes you have this beautiful interaction with someone and you're feeling really trusting and your heart's all open. And all of a sudden they just say something and you go, something just goes off. Well, I sat there and I chewed on it and I chewed on it. I'm like judging myself. So enter the complexity now, right? Because I'm not accepting the reality of that moment. I'm not accepting the simplicity of the fact that they said something and it threw me back. That's it. That's the simple answer. I don't know why. That something happened and it threw me back. But instead of keeping it simple, I had to now make it complex. So my brain's like, well, why does that even bother you? I think you're just being nitpicky. I think you're just like judging them. This is probably some foundation. It's something they did like 3 years ago. And you know what else? It's probably this. You know what? And you're just really insensitive. I'm just like, my brain is just having this entire board meeting about how I'm feeling in that moment is wrong. Right? We do this all the time. Like it's just this constant thing that it's just a feeling. It's like we are human beings. We aren't robots. And so things happen and we respond to them. Our bodies respond, our psyches respond. Who knows what part of me was responding? Maybe it was some karmic memory from a past life that had went, whoa, that felt familiar and uncomfortable. I don't know, right? So I sat there and I chewed and the other person's kind of like noticing that I'm not really engaged in the conversation because I'm so busy in my own mind analyzing the hell out of this thing. And finally, I'm like, Katrina, just be honest. Just say the thing. And so I just looked at them. I said, okay, so I feel really distant right now and I don't really get it, but we were having the conversation and then you said this thing and it just threw me back. And I don't get it. And I've been trying to analyze it in my head, but I don't get it. And we opened up this interesting conversation. And I'm not even saying that we necessarily found a solution, but we were able to have a conversation even if we kind of went, yeah, that's weird. I wonder if it's this. I wonder if it's that. I wonder if it's this. I wonder if it's that. I don't know. But there was something really nice to just be able to have a dialogue with the person that I was having the struggle with. And even if I didn't solve it, who cares? Like sometimes we don't open up conversations or we don't share our truth because we don't know what the end result's going to be, right? If I could guarantee you that, well, if you open up this sort of painful thing or this truth inside of you with this other person, you're like, yeah, but what if they're even mad? Or what if it even makes things worse? Or what if whatever? It's like, yeah, but why does your simple truth not matter? There's something really interesting about when we don't honor that simple response. It creates like so much complexity in our relationships. Someone calls and they say, hey, do you want to go and do this thing? And, this is one of the things that Jim taught me when I was sick, that I had to listen to my heart. And if my heart rose, then it was a yes. And if my heart sank, it was a no. That whole let your yeses be yeses and your noes be noes. Wow, that was the hardest thing. It's still hard, to be honest. It's still something I wrestle with, and to actually know and actually trust inside that if my heart, my soul, my Atman, my whatever it is that lives in this incredibly wise heart center, if it says, then confidently step forward in it. And if it goes, this is your energy. This is your soul. This is your soul saying, no, that's not it. Yet we have been trained to go against it. We've been trained to do the right thing. We've been trained to do the thing that is the most comfortable for everybody. But we're like literally going against our simple yes-no truth. And that's really interesting, right? Like it's an interesting paradigm shift to say, but I am a unique human. I'm going to have unique responses to every situation, right? Like just because this is a yes for you, it doesn't mean it's a yes for me. I'm a unique person. I am here on this planet to work out certain things. I'm here to have different experiences. Why in the world would we assume that we all have a yes on this? You know? So again, there's like this surreal philosophy that we have to kind of look at and say, am I allowed to be a unique person? Like, am I allowed to have a unique perspective that perhaps no one else understands? And just say, yeah, that would be great. Or, no, not really feeling it right now. That's it. There's no complexity. There's no explanation because I don't know why. It was one of the big things that I learned when I was sick. I don't know if I learned it. It's something I'm still learning from way back when. Is that, I don't know, when we honor that truth, life is simple. And the interesting thing is when you hang out with other people who also honor their truth, they aren't going to ask for an explanation either. If you say no, they're going to go, cool, thanks for telling me. Right? And if they say yes, you know they really mean it. So it's always interesting. It's always interesting when people want more than a no or more than the yes, or they keep pushing. Yeah, but what about this? What about this? You know that in their life, they're accustomed to overcomplicating things because they're not honoring their truth, because they don't want you to honor your truth. And that's okay. Again, you can make this very simple. And if someone keeps arguing with you, you just go, this person doesn't understand honoring their truth. Next. Like there's nothing to argue about. There's nothing to discuss. It's just, oh, cool, right? The other thing about our thoughts, it's a lot about our thoughts, obviously, is even the idea of even conceptualizing time, right? The idea that, there's a great Buddhist mantra that says, present moment, only moment. And I feel like wherever I first read about that, they would use this mantra as they did a walking meditation through the grounds. And as they walked, they would just mentally repeat, present moment, only moment. And that is a crazy mantra to try. Because as you think, present moment, only moment, present moment, only moment, you can actually see the thoughts coming in from other timelines. Oh, but then there's this thing that's going to happen tomorrow, and I know, what about this, and then I remember this from way back, and you realize that, wow, I am literally never in this moment. And this moment, this is the only moment. Now I feel very cliche what I'm going to say, but like it's the only moment that we can make choices. It's the only moment of power. It's the only moment that even exists. Right? And this is something that I'm really fascinated with right now, is how much of our mind energy is spent on things that are imaginary. Like they're not real at all. It's just, they're not real. Like it's almost like we've been trained. Like, do you guys ever see the fourth Matrix? The one that just came out like last year. And there was this one line where, I don't know, the architect or something, he says, oh, it's great. If we want to feed off of your brain, we just have to put this idea in your head and an opposing thought, and you'll just spin like this all night. It's great. And I'm like, ever since I heard him say that, and I totally bastardized that, but ever since I heard that, I really watch when my thought start to do this. I'm like, where are you going? Where did this weird thought come from? It's like I have to really discipline myself to not go on social media, or especially TikTok, before I go to bed, Because someone will say something and it will go into my head like a seed, and I will lie in bed having conversations with this total stranger, arguing with whatever they said. And it's just like this weird seed program that now is doing this. It's not even real. It's totally imaginary. The only thing that's real is what's happening right now. Like, this is it. There is nothing else. And it's almost like because we don't like simplicity. We don't like that right here, right now. What am I doing right now? There's nothing else to think about. Like, we don't even know how to do this. It's a fascinating thing to discipline ourselves. And I don't mean discipline. I mean, take it as a practice. It's no matter what I'm thinking, I'm like, hold on. Am I in the future, past, present? No, I'm going to come back here. Okay, I'm going to come back here. Perpetually come back here. And you wouldn't believe, like, just the simple act of stopping that future, past stuff, your mind becomes so much quieter. It's so simple. It's almost so simple, it's painful to actually only be in this moment. Because you're like, oh no, but I have to think about this thing tomorrow. And it's like, okay, put it on a to-do list and do it tomorrow. I know, but I have all these thoughts. Well, then write them all down right now. Write them all down. Get them out on paper. I know, but what about this thing? It's like, but what about right now? Like, what are you doing right now? You know, it's a very interesting thing that we actually have to train ourselves to be simple, to be single-pointed in this moment. The other thing that, and this is very personal, on a part of my personal journey to simplicity, is, you know, especially over the last couple years, and not that I want to get into some weird political thing, but the strange divisiveness and everything that happened over the last few years. One thing I really, really, really learned is that I actually don't know how anyone else thinks. And I think because I've always had this ideal in my head that we are all one, and I want us all to be understanding of each other, and I want us all to be on the same page, and I want us all to, I don't know, feel light and love and la 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 and all that. It's like I actually have spent a lot of time trying to imagine what this other person is thinking, right? And the only way we do it is we project how we think. I've only got this brain. I've only got this processor. I don't have another one to compare it to. So I project how I think about things onto someone else and then try to figure out how would they make that decision based on what I imagine they must be thinking. I can't tell you the brain time and brain space I've wasted trying to figure out how someone could come to that solution. How could they come to that belief? How could they say those things based on how I think? Because I don't know how they think. And it is such an interesting thing to let go of, to say, I don't know how you think. I don't even remotely know how you think. I'm not even, honestly, here's my honest truth. This is as weird as I'm going to get today, probably. But, you know, if you imagine this galactic universe, and I remember, did you ever see the movie K-Pax? K-Pax was a movie with Kevin Spacey where he was an alien that came to Earth, I don't know, to help someone. And so he's telling, and he ends up in a psych ward, and he's telling the psychiatrist, it's like Kevin Costner or someone like that, or Jeff Bridges or someone, and he's telling him, he goes, well, I'm from K-Pax, this planet, and the psychiatrist is like, well, why do you look like this though? And he says, well, because this is the most efficient way to appear in your, carbon-based atmosphere, or whatever he said, however he said it. And that stuck with me like crazy. And sometimes when I'm really pondering things and I'm really wondering how the universe works and how we can have so many different people on the planet with so many different ideas and perceptions and all this, I really do wonder if we really are all just from different galaxies, but we're all appearing like this, kind of like this in this movie K-Pax. And when I go to that place, I don't expect us all to think the same. For some reason, whether that's true or not, it's not the point. But it allows my brain to rest because I don't have to pretend that everybody thinks like me. They really are thinking completely differently. And it's not wrong. It's just completely different. And the beautiful thing, the simplicity, how this feeds into this idea of simplicity, is I just get to show up as me. That's it. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to share my truth. I don't mean my truth about you. I mean my truth about me, about how I feel. And that's it. And they share their truth about them and how they feel. Maybe we have a conversation about it. Maybe we have completely different perspectives. And we assume that we're going to have completely different perspectives. But I'm not going to spend any time and energy trying to analyze why they think the way they think. Instead, perhaps I'm going to ask questions and learn firsthand. And I'm going to say, that's so interesting. I don't see it like that. Can you tell me more about how you got to that or where that comes from? Or did you have experiences? Like we would actually ask people questions instead of spending all this energy in our head trying to fathom how they got there. But of course, we're trying to figure out how they got there from us, from my way of thinking, because it's the only way of thinking I've got, right? So there's an amazing simplicity that happens in relationships when we just allow everybody to show up as they are. We don't analyze them. We don't make assumptions about what they're doing or how they're thinking. And we just show up simply, like children. I like chocolate. They like vanilla. I like whatever. Like we've really, really, really overcomplicated our perception. And truthfully, I think it has everything to do with this frontal cortex in the brain, right? Like animals, for example, don't have this developed frontal cortex. Theoretically, I don't know about dolphins and whales and cool things like that, but theoretically in humans, this is a huge deal. And sometimes when I'm really thinking about humanity and what in the world's going on, sometimes I wonder if this was sort of a new addition in the last, millennia or two. And we're still trying to figure out how to do it because the frontal cortex, like other parts of the brain, we understand that they govern movement or sound or speech and this kind of thing. But this is abstract thought. So in theory, this allows us to imagine a different time, where we don't develop the frontal cortex until we're like 8, 9, 10 years old. Before that, we're just living in the moment. I like that person. I don't like that person. They wrecked my sandcastle. Like I want coffee. That was my inner 6-year-old talking. I want a popsicle, whatever, right? I must want coffee. That's weird. And so, but you can't say, well, next week we're going to do this to a 6-year-old. They go, like they don't have this. They don't have that ability to project into a different timeline. They don't have that ability yet. They don't have the ability to have abstract thought about something that isn't happening. But around age 8, 9, 10, we start to develop this ability to have abstract thought. And sometimes I think as humans, we don't know what to do with it. Like we don't know what the positive use of this is, right? It could be used like Einstein, using our imagination to create and understand, right? The ability to sort of suspend our belief and kind of look around and go, all right, let's imagine that. Like, what if this brain is really, really valuable for that kind of thing? But unfortunately, instead, we fill it with weird stories. And we fill it with vicious cycles of thought and emotion and all these kind of things, or we fill it with fears, and then we dive into those fear thoughts and then we play them all out, right? It's like we don't quite understand what to do with this, which is really interesting when you think of spiritual teachers, the gurus, the siddhis, like all these great teachers. The number one thing they say is you have to control your mind, which seems like a very hard thing to do. But what if what they're saying is we need to clear this frontal cortex? We need to use this for what it's designed for, because there's no way that it's designed to be used for disasterizing. You know, Mark Twain once said, he said, you know, I've been through some terrible things in my life, and some of them actually happened. Right? There's no way that's what this was designed for, to imagine every wrong thing that could happen, or to perpetually play out patterns over and over and over again. There's no way. Because it only puts us into stress and depression and anxiety. So if we meditate, if we do pranayama, if we do exercise, if we run, if we do horseback riding, if we swim in oceans, whatever it is, what do we do that allows this to clear? What do we do to create the set point where we actually have a clear frontal cortex? Imagine, like the back brain's always going to be going, right? That's what it's doing. It's running our heart and our liver and all the good stuff in our body. But this front part, we have control over. Right now, we could simply think something different. We have 100% control of what we want to think about, in the same way that I can lift my arm up and down. So this is why, like in the land of, well, you know, what can we do to create this simplicity in our minds and therefore our lives? You know, we can do things in our external environment. We can look around our house and say, all right, what's current? Are there things in my house that are from my past that I don't look at, that I don't do anything with, that are really just carrying a memory that's unnecessary? To actually just simplify everything in our world. I mean, this is a big thing in the yogic world, right? To just really simplify. And you don't have to become a Zen minimalist, but to just really consciously go through your world, your clothes, your fridge, your house, and say, is this all me right now? Right? Is it me today? Is it me 10 years ago? Is my house filled with the things that other people think I should be? Like, I remember when I was first married, we had a farmhouse, like we were on the farm. And my parents were huge entertainers. They just always had parties and friends over and stuff. Like, my mom was a great hostess and my dad just loved it. They just loved all that. And they were teachers. So they had weekends off, they had summers off. So they had it was very different. And then I get married and we're dairy farmers. But I set my house up like my parents did. And we have a huge dining room suite, and we've got this, and we've got couches, and we've got all, as if we're like serving all these people all the time. But we were dairy farmers. We never entertained people. I'd be lucky to have someone over for coffee. And it was so interesting that my house, well, and also because I had so many people die in my family at that time of my life, the house got filled with my parents' stuff, right? My parents' dining room suites and my grandparents' couches. And my whole house, at one point in a point of low depression, I remember walking through my house and just thinking, I used to call it the house of dead people's things. And I just realized there is not a thing in this house that represents me or that reflects who I am. And so one day I actually gathered everything together that wasn't me. I was reading Sarah Ben Breathnock's book at the time called Simple Abundance. Like, if this is interesting to you, this book called Simple Abundance, so beautiful. It's just a beautiful, beautiful book. And I was reading that at the time, and I packed everything up, including the dining room suites, everything. The dining room suite. And I sold it all at auction. My husband was a very patient man. And but everything off the walls, everything. I just needed a blank slate. I needed to even understand, who was I if I wasn't their daughter? You know? So it's a really interesting thing to just go through your life, go through your car, go through your bedroom, go through your apartment, your house, and say, is this me today? Was this me 20 years ago? Like, could we risk just being me today? You know, I often think of monks, and I used to I have this friend that I've talked about before, and I used to call him my friend the monk in blue jeans, and he had lived in some monasteries. So when he lived in his apartment, he's married now with kids, so he has a very different existence. But when he was alone, he used to have his bowl, and he had his chopsticks, and he had a pot, and he cooked everything in this pot, and he ate it in the bowl, and he ate it with the chopsticks. And then he would wash the pot and wash the bowl and wash the chopsticks. And he just had the one. He didn't have a sink full of dishes. He just had the one thing. And he was so present and so simple. It's a funny thing how almost scary that feels. To be so in the moment, almost like, what would I do with myself if my life was so simple? It's almost like we don't remember what it's like to just create like a child. If I really had a blank slate and I didn't have a sink full of dishes and a house that had to be cleaned and 400 things on a to-do list, what would I do in that kind of simplicity? You know, there's a lot of reasons we keep our lives very, very busy, very, very complex, because it's like we've just, lost touch with, like, do you remember, when we used to go on long car rides and we would sit in the car and you just stare out the window for hours. Sometimes you picked on your brothers and sisters and drove your parents crazy, but we don't have enough of that just nothing time, So in the land of yoga and meditation, there's really interesting things you can do. Like there's a practice called Tradikam. And Tradikam is how we train singular vision here. So sometimes this is where you might stare at a candle, right? So you kind of close your eyes, you breathe deeply. On Insight Timer, I have a practice called Kaya Stherium. And this is a really good one to do when you want to practice something like Tradikam. So you sit still, you light your candle, then you practice this Kaya Stherium, which just basically allows your body to become perfectly still. And then you open your eyes and you gaze at the fire, you gaze at the candle flame until the candle flame appears here. You know how you do that and you can stare at something and it kind of becomes the negative here? And as soon as you stare at it long enough, it will appear here. And then you close your eyes and look at the flame in your third eye. And then maybe that'll kind of flicker out. And then you open your eyes and you look at the candle flame again. And you keep doing this. And eventually, after you've practiced this for, months or who knows how long, maybe once, who knows. If you ever are lost in life, if life ever becomes too complex, all you have to do is close your eyes and see this flame. And there's something about feeling this flame or seeing this flame in our third eye, in this chakra, that instantly simplifies everything. And we breathe deeply and a solution will rise. Tradikam can be done staring at something beautiful. It can be done staring at a tree or a mountain or a blade of grass or the ocean, right? It's this constant focus. You just focus and focus and focus and allow everything else to float away. And all we're doing is practicing simplifying. We're practicing clearing this frontal cortex so that we can actually walk around our life with this clear slate. We can actually observe the world without a million filters, without a million fears, without a million backstories. And to actually live like that, to imagine living in that kind of simplicity. Like it almost feels surreal, right? Like, oh yeah, but could anyone do that? And it's like, what if that's all we're supposed to do? What if that's the joy? What if that's seeing the world through the eyes of a child? Like, what if I always am, I'm very sensitive to complexity. That as soon as something becomes really complex, I go, all right, there's some extra stuff in here. There's no way this is actually this complicated. No, I don't think so. So, yeah, the joy. And it's funny because I called this talk The Power of Simplicity. And I wasn't going to. I was going to call it The Joy of Simplicity. But it really is a power, and not in a weird power over way, but in a way of actually living our lives in this place of real clarity and in this moment. So suddenly, we really can affect change. Right? We can really make choices in our lives in this clear space. And it really is a powerful space. And it's interesting to think about power and simplicity in the same sentence. But I think it's important. Otherwise, we don't value it highly enough. We think it's, oh yeah, simplicity for simple-minded people or something. And it's like, no, simplicity is not for simple-minded people, whatever that means. It's a very powerful, wonderful, joyful space to live. So I'm going to put my glasses on. And if you guys have any questions, I'm really happy to answer them. What if you've said yes to so many things that you feel overwhelmed about being able to do everything well, and yet you still want to do them all? Oh, I hear that. Then I just trust that it all is meant to happen. But it's sort of like that analogy of your computer, where it's like we think, even though we've said yes to 100 things, which is 100%, I totally identify with this. But I think I need to have all 15 screens open, and I need my back brain chewing on all of them all the time. And what if it isn't like that? What if it's like, okay, I've agreed to all of these things because my life is rich and juicy, and I'm going to do one thing at a time. And it's going to be blissful and amazing. And then we kind of trust that time will allow it. That idea that time bends. When we need things to be done or we want things to be done, time is not, we have this illusion that because the clock ticks, that there's a limited amount of time and I can only do so much in the time allotted. But is that real? That's one of the greatest things that quantum physicists and physicists love to play with, is the true nature of time. Does it bend when we're focused? But I believe, the one thing I believe, whether it's true or not, I don't know, but what I believe in my own life is the more singularly focused I am on any task, and I'm with you, I love having 15 things and 15 irons in the fire. But when I am most singularly focused on a single thing, there's always enough time for everything. But when I get everything in, suddenly I don't even want to do anything because it just doesn't, I'm so overwhelmed. So that's my sense of it. We sold our house and moved so many boxes, imaginable amount of clutter. I want to let go of most of everything, but my wife wants to keep all, including stuff that hasn't seen the light of day. Not a simple conversation or to find partnership other than compromise. I find this so interesting. I'd actually love to do a much longer talk about this, because I believe that in the future, we will have relationships where we don't need to compromise anything. And And this is a journey, right? It's not a small thing. Like, imagine if everybody actually got to be whoever they were. I mean, and what that would mean is we aren't necessarily overlapping our spaces either, right? In the old paradigm, when we have a partner, we have a kitchen, we have a living room, we have a bedroom, we have a backyard, you know what I mean? Like, it's not, we're almost set up for this sort of, not just codependence, but almost we have to come to a unanimous decision, which requires that one of us compromises. And so within the current paradigm where we share space and one person wants to keep everything and the other person wants to be minimalist, that's really hard. Like that's really, 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 really hard. But you wonder if there's a gentle way into this independent love where you kind of say, all right, how do we do this that we really honor each other? But but in no way do I have to live like you want to live and you don't have to live like I want to live. And it might be something radical like, Osho used to always say that you should have separate bedrooms, right? That you just simply maintain the autonomy of being an independent human. And then you actually are healthier in the relationship because you're still independent people. You're not sleeping in the same bed. You're not sharing the same space all the time. But when you have separate bedrooms, you actually remember who you are, and then you bring more of yourself to the relationship to begin with, right? And so what if there's a gentle journey towards something where it's even as simple as, I recognize that you really love having a lot of stuff and I really would like to play with having less. Let's have different separate cupboards in the kitchen, or let's have separate parts of the bathroom, or let's have these are my shelves and these are your shelves, or can I have the main floor and you have that floor, or something that one's not right and one's not wrong. But we recognize that we really are different and that's okay. And there's obviously every space is different and every couple is different, but I just think it's an interesting meditation to go, so how do we do this that nobody has to compromise what they love? Some people love to be surrounded by lots of stuff, and some people are Zen monks in their hearts, so, but to imagine that it's possible is interesting. I've been a hoarder all my life. I've kept small things from the past, gifts that my friends gave me during childhood, or souvenirs that I've collected from different places. How do I know if I should let that go? I think it's really important to honor what brings you joy. And I had an uncle and aunt who used to collect salt and pepper shakers. And they had an entire room covered. The walls were covered with salt and pepper shakers from all over the world. Right? What's wrong with that? Look, it's beautiful. It's not my way, but it's beautiful and it's lovely. It's like someone mentioned that they're an artist. Well, your house should be a representation of, it's where you live. It's not your house isn't it's not a showcase. It doesn't have to look good for anybody else. You know what I mean? Like, we're not going into the Home and Garden magazine or something. If you love knickknacks, then have knickknacks. If you love Zen simplicity, then have Zen simplicity. So the question just becomes, if you call yourself a hoarder, right? If that's something that you genuinely understand about yourself, then my guess is that there are some things in your world that you don't need anymore. And there's other things that still really hold great value. And that's how I would discern it. if this doesn't hold, I mean, that's one of the things that Sarah Ben Breathnock used to say, that if it isn't beautiful, useful, or something else, maybe it was just those. If it isn't beautiful or useful, let it go. But what's beauty to each other, to everybody? Some people, beauty might be having beautiful paintings on every wall. And beauty to another person might be white walls with glass. You know, there's no judgment here. I'm not a believer that everyone should live in Zen simplicity. I think we should all be our quirky, amazing selves. But if there's stuff that we don't need, if there's stuff we're holding on to, say out of fear, out of scarcity, things like that, that's a problem, right? It's sometimes we hoard because we're afraid of the downtimes or whatever. Like, I think we can each really look at things and say, or maybe you need a really good friend to come in and help you, who loves you, a friend who loves you to come in and help you. Because maybe there's emotional loading to some of this stuff and you really don't need it. You know? It's, there's another really interesting process that sounds really dark, but it's called Swedish death cleaning. And the premise is that, let's imagine you were going to die and your family was going to have to go through all of this, or someone was going to have to go through all of this. What would you get rid of? Right? What would you keep? You know, I've had to go through a lot of estates of my family and grandparents, and it's hard. So there's a lot of different tricks you can play, you can do. You know, but I don't think it's right to glamorize Zen minimalist living either. You're right? Like, I don't think there's a right way here. Whether your house is filled with interesting corners of bits and art and knickknacks, awesome. If your house is glass minimalist, pristine, awesome. We all know the things that we don't need, right? The unhealthy things, the closets filled with stuff we never wear, that we never will wear, that are collecting dust. Those are the things we can get rid of. Can we touch on this topic from the angle of people? Yeah. So if you imagine simplifying your life in terms of people, such a big deal. Like, to even say, let's imagine for a moment that we are truly on a spiritual path, right? And on that, and when I say spiritual path, I just mean that, sorry, my stomach's growling. When I say we're on a spiritual path, what I mean is that there's more going on than just survival, that there's intention, that we're connected to something greater. So then all of a sudden, every experience that we're attracted to matters. Every experience we're repulsed by, and I don't mean repulsion, I mean literally magnetically pushed away from, that also matters. These are clues on our path. So when people come into our lives, if we are magnetically attracted to them, to having conversation with them, to spending time with them, that's interesting. If for some reason everything they say annoys us, we don't like it, we're constantly, and we feel repulsed in that, oh, do you want to go do this? No. What if we just trust it? What if we don't go into some big complexity? Oh, well, it's probably because of this, and it's because they have these political views, and what if we don't go there? And we just trust the simplicity of the yes-no. And it's not yes-no forever. It's not that, oh, I'm attracted to this person, and I don't mean like sexually, I mean my soul is attracted to this person. Maybe I'm just attracted to this person for this week, or this project, or this something, right? Because in any moment, that could shift, right? And right now, this person, we're just meant to take a break for a while. Maybe that while is forever. Maybe it's 3 days. Who knows? But we allow ourselves to live in the moment. And when someone says, do you want to do this? Yes, no. Simple. Well, why? Don't know. right? And then all of a sudden our lives become filled with the people who lift our hearts. But the way to keep it simple is do not add a philosophy to it. Don't say, oh, well, I like having this person with me because da 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 da, or I don't like this person because, like, don't go into the because. All we know is I'm feeling called to be with this person or not be with this person. What if we don't know? What if the story is so big and so deep that we'd never know the whole truth? And yeah, and it includes family. Maybe you feel really drawn to go have dinner with this family, or you don't feel like going to that reunion or whatever, right? So thank you so much for being here. I hope you have a wonderful day.